Welcome back, everyone, to the Everyday Disciples podcast, where we discuss what it means to follow in the way of Jesus in everything, everywhere, every day. And this month, we're going to talk around the idea of what does it mean to be connected in community. My name is Andrew. I'm one of the pastors here at Crossroads, and will be your host alongside Ruth, who's back again, doing some hosting duties and helping us out. Ruth's our communication director and does all our design work. So I always say, if you think something is cool about us, it's probably because of Ruth. And our guest today, our very special guest, we are joined by my good friend, Steve Dang. And Steve is currently serving as the Chief Ministry Officer at Valley Christian Schools. He is the Senior Vice President there as well. That's in San Jose. But more than just what he does, Steve is a gifted communicator, teacher, pastor, husband, father, and I have had the good fortune of calling him friend for a long, long time. And so, Steve, I am so grateful that you're joining with us today. Welcome to the podcast, man.
It's so good to be with you guys and Crossroads friends. I'm sorry I haven't been up there in a while. That's purely on me, not on Andrew. But every time I come up to your church, it really feels like family. And I really mean that. Sometimes you say that and you're kind of like, yeah, is that true? But it really is true. When I come up there, I really feel connected and I love being with that community. So,
Well, we love having you up here. So we look forward to getting you up here. But for those who maybe don't know you that are jumping in,
yeah.
I'd like to start this conversation with whoever the guest is. What's a fun or interesting thing that people need to know about you?
Lots of different ways I can go with this, but I think if people want to know me, you got to know that I'm a serial hobbyist. That means that I love hobbies. I have lots of them. I wish, my wife's like, if you bring home one more hobby, I'm like, I'm gonna be so upset with you. But I'm the kind of guy who doesn't go halfway with anything. I think Andrew knows me. But whatever it is, it's full send. I want to experience it all. I want to deep dive into it. I am a nerd at heart, and so I think it just flows into my hobbies. And I get into really weird things. So I haven't gotten into like the weird like painting like little die cast toys, but I think that if I could, I would go full in, buy everything. So
That day will come.
that's when you know.
It is, it's like such a true statement, because anything you do, you go full bore. But part of what is so great is even what we're talking around, this idea of community. You're not one to do anything alone. You like are this vortex that pulls everybody into it with you, and like, you've got to try this and you've got to do this, and you kind of build community through those hobbies.
Yeah. I make a really good hype man, actually. Like for you, Andrew, if I get up there, I'm like, Andrew's the greatest pastor you will ever have in your life, and his teaching will transform you.
And now everyone,
Best ever.
you've lost credibility with everyone. You're gonna lie about
I watch your YouTube feed, dude. It's fantastic.
Uh, the purpose of this and why we do this, one of the values that we carry here is that we are everyday disciples. And that means our relationship with God, it's intended to shape every part of our lives. There's no separation between the mundane and the spiritual. Our life with God isn't confined to a moment on Sunday morning. It's to be lived out every moment and in every setting. And so we started these conversations as a way of just really kind of doubling down on some practices that we just see as healthy for any follower of Jesus. We know that these aren't the end all be all, but we see these as some the keystone things to really develop. And so we started these conversations by talking around what does it mean to be in step with the Spirit, allowing the Holy Spirit to guide you, fill you, lead you. What does it mean to be steeped in Scripture? That you're plumbing through the Word of God, you're using that as your baseline. What is the possibility of prayer, and how can you be purposeful in prayer, that conversation with God? And we're going to look at worship. What does it mean to worship everywhere and everything? We're going to look at service. How do we selflessly serve? We're going to look at stewardship, our time, our talent, our treasure. We're going to look at story. What's the story that we're telling with our lives? And how do we share the good news of Jesus by the way in which we live? But today we're focusing on the idea of community, being connected in community. And just to kind of give you a heads up on how we're defining that, we see community as disciples of Jesus following in the way of Jesus together. There's intent, there's purpose, there's mission behind it. But I also know community has kind of become one of those words that people throw around, and they're trying to create community everywhere. And what's amazing to me is that we live in a world that's more technologically connected than ever,
Mhm.
and yet we're seeing this epidemic of loneliness.
Mhm.
And so, Steve, I'd be curious, why do you think so many people feel so lonely right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hinted at this with technology, and I think it's pretty well documented now from the Surgeon General to, San Mateo County to, kind of what's being observed everywhere. But I think one of the areas I really would really lean into is sort of the area that I see is here in Silicon Valley, but it's not just Silicon Valley, how it affects our kids. And I work in an educational setting now with college and high school, junior high, and elementary school students. And I think one of the areas that we haven't really talked about much is when it comes to technology, we have to realize that we're a part of like an algorithm now. And everything is algorithmized to your own interests and your likes. And, you search motorcycles, and all of a sudden, on Instagram, there's motorcycle influencers, and it really kind of caters to what you like. But when you think about that relationally, you also know that that's not the reality of living in community. You don't just exist with the people that like the same things that you like, who are interested in the same things you like. And so when you hear the word tribalism, I'm like, everything else in our life is geared towards tribalism. And so I think one of the areas that I would say that really disconnects us is this idea that kind of gets built into our rhythms because of the algorithm, because of social media and technology specifically, is that we tend to see people who disagree with us as people who we are to contend with rather than people that we connect with. And so we see that in high school now. When you think about there's only X amount of spots in college. If you are constantly being told as a community, there's only so many spots, and if this person gets it, it means that you don't. Then you bought into this zero sum game, and you start to see each other as our competition rather than people that we are actually supposed to connect with. And so I think technology in this regard isn't just a matter of like, all the normal things, we don't truly know each other. I think all that stuff is true. But I think one of the areas that is needing a little bit more research and some things that we need to really dive into more is really looking at how technology influences how we view other people. And then you start to how much easier it is for you to connect with somebody who agrees with every aspect of your life, down to your interests, and our lack of ability to really make connections with people that we don't necessarily see eye to eyeball with all the time. But that's also a huge part of connection community, right? Is that you're interacting with ideas and dialogues, and sometimes when somebody comes up to you like, hey, I disagree with you on this thing, it actually, like, through that conflict, you build connection in a unique way, when one, there's vulnerability, and two, there's trust that's able to be bought into it. And so just a little bit of a nuance when I see technology, but when I see sort of globally what it looks like, I'm like, yeah, like we don't have experience right now interacting with people who are different than us. And then when we're out in public, we have to get over that initial awkwardness of, keeping the phone in your pocket when you feel the awkwardness and like pushing through that. Because I think it's become so accustomed in our lives. Like when you feel awkward or you don't know what to do, the first thing you do is like you get on your phone and you have to like fight that instinct now, and to put it in your pocket and be like, okay, I'm just going to be present and work through the awkwardness. So lots of different ways we can go with this if we
Yeah.
want to nerd out on it, but that's just some of my own thoughts there.
No, but I think even what you're saying there of the pushing through the awkwardness of when there's like a lull in a conversation, um, nobody feels like someone's paying attention to them more if they pull out their phone, right? Like
Mhm.
no one's like, oh, you're super engaged with me right now. It's
Yeah,
instant
totally.
barrier. And then usually it's like a cause and effect. Like if you pull out your phone, the person next to you, they're going to probably pull out their phone so that they can distract themselves too. And it's
Mhm.
like you just built into that.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's so easy to pick on like the younger generation, but man, I see adults do it all the time, because everyone's like, "Oh, those kids." You look at a row of kids, and you're like, half of them are on their cell phone, and you're like, "Oh, that's you." And I'm like, "No, we all do that." Like, I think Simon Sinek talks about this, but he talks about the phone that's always grabbing your attention, like when you're having a meal and it's sitting, even the fact that it's sitting on the table, like it's still pinging you, it's still lighting up, and it's distracting you, and sometimes you're like, am I fully there, am I fully present? So yeah, there's so many ways, just even the physical device and not just connection to internet, that really impacts our ability to connect with one another.
I think even as you're saying that, it reminds me of other ways that we struggle in community. There's kind of like affinity group or life stage groups that we go through, that
Yes.
make community easy. And one of the things that I'm looking at right now, I'm paying attention to is like we're still in the throes of we've got kids in school, and that creates some community within that where it pulls us all together, right? Like, and so there's families that I'm cheering our kids on together, and so there's this built-in thing. But I'm like, there's going to be a moment where the school thing is gone. Like our kids have
Hmm.
graduated college, it's not the same kind of community that's built there for parents, and we're going to have to like those those families that we see because we're at the sporting event, we're going to have to make a choice. Do we continue to pursue them, right? Like, and it's like we're still some years off, right? Like we still got like 4 years of high school ahead of us. But of things I'm thinking through of like, oh yeah, and I see people as some of those affinity groups and those life stage groups go on, connecting becomes really hard, becomes really
Hmm. Well, that's like also it tells you to the depth of our relationships. Like it's so easy to stay at the surface level. I had this experience where, I used to go to my wife's work party all the time. And, she's been a nurse now for like, almost 20 years. And we used to go to these work parties. And like year one, we're standing around, totally normal for us to talk about the Warriors and the Niners, and then year two, I come back and they're like, oh, so how about the Warriors and the Niners? Year three, year four, year five. And you're like, wow, it's been 5 years and we can't break past that common connection. And it takes, again, like, I just really feel like that ability to really go past that and to be vulnerable, to share your story, to truly be curious about another person's life, to say, like, how about your kids? Like how about, beyond sports? What do you like to do? And I think it's just like that little extra effort, when it comes to connections that I think we all have to push past. And I think in sports, like I'm a full on softball dad now, like full flat bill, Oakley Sutros. I can't grow a beard, otherwise I would, but like, there's a look and there's a vibe, and that's how, parents kind of connect. And part of you, I think, is exactly right. Like, is there anything beyond this? And I think that requires honestly purely effort, and how much are you willing to create margin in your life to make those extra connections to push past sort of those areas that are really easy. And it's just easier not to be known on a deeper level because it's so vulnerable.
And it's funny that we want to be known, but at the same time, we're terrified to be known. And so sometimes we can defeat ourselves by not putting ourselves out there or taking the risk because either we've been burned or we don't know what's going to be returned, or is someone going to, if I share this, is someone actually going to hold that as sacred, right? Because when we share
Yeah.
our stories, I think one of the things as a pastor that I feel so privileged in is people share their stories with me all the time. And I feel like when they're sharing what they're going through, what God's brought them through, what life has taken them through, it's this like sacred moment that I want to be cautious with. I want to be careful with, that I want to steward well. But sometimes you give your story to the wrong person, and suddenly it's ammunition against you, and you're like, this is why I'm never
Yeah.
with them again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah. Well, it goes back to we see people as people we contend with, and if you're on constantly like in competition, you don't want to put yourself out there because it's a vulnerability, again. And I think what's amazing is like when I think about our stories and the things that we go through, I think one of the great lies of the enemy, frankly, is to make us feel like we're by ourselves and we're alone. And statistically, that's just not true. I mean, I'm sure, Andrew, we have gone through this so many times, but have you ever had somebody walk in your office and they're like, I'm really lonely. And then the next person walk in their office be like, I'm really lonely. And you're like, why don't you just turn and look at each other? But you don't know that you're experiencing the same thing. We do an exercise called Cross the Line, and basically, we have a gym full of kids, and we'll line the kids up on two different like lines, aisles, and then right in the middle, like you think like center court. What we'll say is we'll put out a series of statements out there, and we'll say, "Hey, cross the line if you like rap music," and you'll see all these kids crossing the line. They'll see each other, but then we get a little bit deeper and we'll say, how many, cross the line if you've had a parent or a loved one get cancer, and then they cross the line, they look at each other. And then we go even deeper and we're like, cross the line if you have ever had cancer or that you have ever dealt with an illness. And it's amazing because they think they're going to be the only one, but all of a sudden you see 5, 10 kids that are out there and you realize, wow, this truly is something that we're really not alone. And we can actually connect in some deeper ways. And looking at really the things that we go through, I think there's a lot more in common than there are the things that we think that really divide us. Because I think even here in this room, if I were to ask the same questions with just, 3 people on a podcast, we would probably find a lot more in common with the things that we go through than the things that make us different.
The power of commonality and intentionality in the vulnerable. And I love that that's what you're getting at with intentionality in meeting people and getting to know people, because yeah, it is so easy to be surface, but when you find that one bit that you're like, I'm gonna be vulnerable and share this one tiny piece, then that's when the power of community starts to happen. It's like, oh, I'm less lonely now, oh, someone knows me, which is the power of being known and
Yeah.
to know others, and it's a mutual gift, which is so cool.
Mhm. Mhm.
I love your definition too of community that you guys are going after this series, because the word community is made up of 2 words, right? It's the word common unity, and you're looking at something beyond the things that are surface. If our common unity is your sport, what your kids are involved in, the high school you go to, the school you went to. It's really shallow, when you think about like connection. It only lasts so long. At some point, you can't play anymore. At some point, you graduate. At some point, that comes to an end. But when we say like our common unity is in Christ, like that's eternal, and that's something that we as Christians that transcends distance. When you moved from the Bay Area, I was crushed. Like a piece of me was torn out of that because of our connection, but because of our faith, because of our mutual love of Christ. I know that regardless of anything that happens, you move to China, like I moved, all the way around the world. We still have a common unity in Christ, and that's really special and unique about Christian community in particular.
Well, and I think along that of if community is built around being a disciple of Jesus, like I'm aimed towards him, I'm following in his way, I am prioritizing him, and oh, you're doing that too, and we're going to chase after him together. Like that is why I feel like for you and I, we came together so quick, like our hearts united so quickly because we were serving in ministry together, and even the way we were like pursuing kids and working in student ministry when we started, right? I was like, oh, this guy gets it. Like we always joked, like we would be the last ones leaving the building because that's who you were. That's who I was. So we would bond all the time because we had this common vision of, man, we want these kids to know Jesus. And it doesn't mean we agree on everything either. Earlier you were talking around like people are afraid of disagreements. You have sharpened me in the ways that we disagree because I feel safe enough to vet ideas with you or to like talk through,
Mhm.
man, I really feel like God challenged me with this. What do you think? And you're like, well, that's scripturally wrong, and we'll talk through those things and we'll push on each other. But I trust you because I know your common vision, your common, like,
Yeah.
you want to be like Jesus, more and more like him, and you want to live a life that reflects him and
Yeah.
point to him.
Well, there's so many things too. It's like you realize when I'm interacting with you, I'm not here to reaffirm what I already believe. When I'm interacting with you, like I want to be changed. I want to be transformed. I think that's just part of what it means to be in community. But it's easier to disagree with somebody when you know that they're going to stick around and like lock the stupid doors with you, all around the campus, so we don't get blamed later, as youth pastors often get blamed for everything, or that you're cleaning up some kids' throw up, and you just know. Sorry, I don't know if that's TMI, but that's just like true story. But we disagreed, but I was like, you know what, like we're going to lock up these buildings together. We're going to clean up all of the junk and the garbage that gets left around the campus, because that's what the difference is. Like I'm with you even in the disagreement, and I'll prove that I'm with you because we're doing literally the dirty stuff of ministry and life together, cleaning up literally after other people's stuff. So man, I wish we had time for just story time to talk about Hume and like camp and all the crazy things we experienced together that really bonded us. But there was never a moment where I felt like Andrew, you were like, I'm gonna leave you to do with that. You're the high school pastor, that's your job. And but you were really like with me in all of those things because it's so easy to do that. You're like, well, good luck with that, everybody. I'm moving on with my life. But that's some of the things that really bonded us, and that creates again that safety for us to be able to share where we might have conflict sometimes, which I know is surprising to know because people are like, how could you be best friends that you have conflict with? But we are very different people. So
But and continue to learn so much from one another, right? As we chase after Jesus.
Mhm.
I'm always, I know whenever community comes up, usually one of the first places people go when they talk around scripture is they jump to Acts, right? Like they will bypass what Jesus did in community, we'll jump to Acts, we'll talk around, and they devoted themselves, this Acts 2:42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, right? Again, um, that connection to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon every soul. Many wonders, signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were together and had all things in common.
mm,
They were selling their possessions and belongings and
mm,
distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, they were attending the temple together, breaking bread in their homes. They received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Um,
mm,
but throughout that passage, what I love is there's so much. They had all things in common. There was a constant fellowship. They were in their homes, right? There was, and what was drawing them together was the transformation of Jesus. Like that was, and in the early church, and you look at even church as it grew out and expanded, that you had people of all different, social structure, rich, poor. You had those who were slaves, those who were free. You had men, women coming together in commonality, and that's the piece that we read that and we always go like, that's what I'm looking for, as though
mm.
it's all perfect. And all we need to do is read through the letters of the New Testament to remember that like everything was broken and flawed, and
Yeah,
there's weird stuff happening.
yeah, yeah.
But at its best, right, there's this commonality that's shared and burdens are shared, right? They're selling possessions to pay for other people to make sure that they're okay. My money's,
Mm,
or suddenly my money is like our
mm,
money, not in
mm.
like a socialist or communist construct, but like, hey, what I have, I'm going to use to the glory of God and for the good of others.
Yeah, I mean, like I go back to again, they had a common unity. And also they had the word communion. They had a common union that was bigger than like their stuff. And I think I love what you're talking about, like with the idea that the church actually had to work through the same garbage that we have to work through in community. If you read the book of Corinthians, it's like, wow, even more stuff I feel like than we typically deal with, or maybe the same in some cases. But one of the things that I always am thinking about is like we look back at the Old Testament and the New Testament and we think, oh, well, that was good for them. That's not possible today. But as I look at the documents of the early church, I see evidence that these people didn't just look at what happened in Acts chapter 2 and say, wow, good for them. But that couldn't happen here. The reality is that they actually experienced that. It's 30 years after Jesus died, right? There's a non-Christian, so there's a non-Christian source where the emperor sends out one of his governors named Pliny the Younger, and he's like, go find out if what we're hearing about the Christians is true. Are they incestuous? Are they are they eating or are they cannibals? Like all of these things. And he comes back and he reports, he's like, actually, what I'm seeing amongst this community is actually the opposite of what we've experienced. It's the ways that they connect with each other. It's the way they sacrifice for each other, that they're seeing leadership that transcends their race and their gender. And they're like, I've even found two deaconesses who were former slaves, who are now serving within their church, which is amazing to me. And then you fast forward to second century in Tertullian's Apology, and he'll say things like, look at how they love one another, that they would even die for each other. And so you think about this and you look at like Acts chapter 2, it's like, what level did they actually do this? Is this just exaggeration? But when you look at the documents of the early church, even from non-Christian sources and Christian sources, we see that they took this as a conviction. it wasn't just a nice idea, that they actually lived these things out. And it is really amazing. Aristides of Athens, if you guys go look up his apology, again, you're gonna see that when they one of the things that he talks about is like when there was somebody amongst them who didn't have food or they didn't have need, it said that Christians would fast 2 or 3 days to supply for that person what they needed. And you think about that kind of care and that kind of love, that really meant for them to say, like, gosh, like my view of Christ is so much bigger than my view of my own stuff. And I would say that that's even true emotionally, not just physical stuff, but sometimes you think, oh, well, I've got so much stuff going on in my own life. I can't put that on hold to care for another person. And I really want to tell people that no, like if people can do this with their stuff, and we have part of our spiritual lineage and part of our spiritual heritage is evidence that Christians didn't just think this was a nice idea, but that Christians actually followed through with this. It's incredibly inspiring. And so, what can I do to just shift a little bit about my view of my own stuff to really focus on God? And that allows me to actually see other people in some really unique ways. And so, I might just be nerding out because I'm in school, kind of like like pouring through ancient documents. But I was just so moved by the way that early Christians lived their lives that there's actually a historical record of this. And so when we look at the early church, we read the book of Acts, I don't read that as history of like, oh, well, they didn't have the internet and they didn't have all of these other, they didn't have medicine. But I'm like, no, like there's something to tell us that this is part of our spiritual lineage and we can live into that and we can live towards that today. And that's what made Christians so attractive to a pagan Roman Empire, and we can lean into that. Not to nerd out on you, but I totally
Oh,
did. So too late.
as you're saying that, and we see in Acts and we see kind of this like explosion of people caring for one another. Um, it's not that strange when you go back to you were talking about that. And I'm like, but what did Jesus do?
Mhm.
Mhm.
What did he do? Like he had his inner three, he had his 12, he had his 72. But even when you think around when he was feeding the 5,000 and they're sitting there and they're like, man, how are we going to do this? We can't feed all these people. Like, what was Jesus training them in? Well, yeah, actually, watch what I can do
Mhm.
with the little that you have. Watch what can be done, and
Mhm.
the disciples they're being trained up in that moment to see like, hey, the needs of others isn't just like, hey, that's your problem. Jesus is like, no, 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 no. This is our problem. So
Mhm.
what are we gonna do about it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a cost to the love that Jesus prays for his disciples. When he's like, "Hey, you'll know you're my disciples if you love one another," and we're like, "Oh, that's nice. Like, let's put that on the wall." And we don't realize that like Jesus gave his life for that unity. He gave his life for that kind of love, and and that's actually the expectation that Jesus wants for us to lay down our lives for one another. And he's like, hey, like the world's not going to know we're Christians if we put up with one another or if we tolerate one another. It's like, no, the world's going to know that we're his followers because of the way that we love each other and serve one another and sacrifice for each other and forgive one another and honor one another above ourselves. For as much as it depends on me to live at peace with the people who, it goes on. There's like so many commands to one another, but it's literally impossible to one another without another one another. And so like we have to like hang on to this reality that Jesus isn't giving great suggestions. Jesus is giving us commands to his church, and we need to at some point really ask ourselves and ponder, am I taking that seriously, or am I just putting that on a wall?
Mhm.
Right. It's a
Mhm.
great bumper sticker, but actually, am I real willing to? And I know like the word obedience is one that people like kind of gear up towards. Like, I don't like that word, but like, are we willing to obey Jesus? Like, are we
Mhm.
willing to take his words and put them into action? And there are, I was actually, it's funny you said the one another's. I think there's like 59 one another's
Yep.
in the
Good
scripture.
number. Catch up.
We'll, I'm going to find a list for that and we'll put that in the show notes so that you can actually go through those.
Hmm.
Because that's just a good practice too. Of like, am I living these out? And maybe don't like go like, I'm going to live all 59 today. Like maybe take like two or three at a time and say, okay,
Yeah.
how can I practice these? But
Yeah, now I can I just say too, like it's not up to our own effort, right? Like Jesus isn't like, hey, here's a checklist. Like, did you forgive somebody today? Did you did you like have mercy on somebody today? I think that this purely happens from the transformation of the Holy Spirit. And so like if you're gonna try to do those things, like it'll be good for a time, but you'll run out. And I think we need to remember it's the Holy Spirit's transformative work in all of us that allows us to be able to do that because you're limited. You know, I can't be that person who's like dispensing peace all the time. Like you know, as much as I love being like a smiley McGee, but the true reality is like, gosh, like I have so many frustrating days, and I need God to love people through me. And so it's not like here's a checklist. How am I doing this week? Am I getting a grade on it? I'm like, yeah, maybe like a low D on good days. So
But I think within that, like when you recognize it too, like I don't have anything to give here, or my response is, I don't want to show up for that person right now. I want someone to
Mm,
show up for me right now,
mhm,
is to pay attention to that and be like, Lord, clearly, I need you. And
mhm,
would you help shape my response? Or, and would you also help me to see why am I at such a deficit right now that I feel like I have
mm,
nothing to get? Like there's things to pay attention there where when we're walking in step with the Spirit, that conviction comes, and not so that again you can be piled on and feel terrible about yourself, but pay attention to like if you never want to help somebody, if you always feel like that's inconvenient and you're angry about it,
mm,
worth paying attention to.
mhm,
If I always feel like everyone is inconveniencing me, that's usually pretty good like indication for me that in the barometer of my heart there's some other stuff I need to deal with. And so, Lord, would you help me? Would you help me to pay attention to these things?
mhm,
And would you shift? Would you shift me that I'd be more like you? Because I can't do it on my own. But you're absolutely
mm.
right. Like we can't try and just like, hey, I'm going to will my way to
Yeah.
love.
mhm,
It's like, oh,
It's a
Lord,
cycle that we get into, you know. It's like otherwise, you know, as a church leader, you know, you're like, well, in the New Testament, you know, they did this, so we should be doing that. And I realized, you know what, as a church, we can't do everything that maybe you're passionate about, but that's not what God's call is in us. And when you have a community, you can trust, well, that might not be my calling to support XYZ ministry or to this group that's in need, but this is my call. But you know that there is somebody out there in the world that is doing that same exact thing. You're not being disobedient. It's just that you have a unique call. And I think the community aspect allows us to give other organizations, other people, other pastors the benefit of the doubt, you know, and other Christians the benefit of the doubt. Just because they're not doing what you care about doesn't mean that they don't care about that same thing. It's just that they're calling them to different things. And that's what creates disunity, I think, within the church is when we don't realize we're a body, you know, and we don't realize that not everyone can be a big toe, you know, not everyone could be like the shiny object that's out there, but we're all playing different roles, and that brings together the community that we experience in the body of Christ.
mhm,
as you're saying that, Romans Romans 12:3, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, through though many, are one body in Christ and individually members of one another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them. If prophecy in proportion to our faith, if service in our serving, the one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. And that idea of we're united under Christ, but we're all unique, right? It's not this. There's a unity, but it doesn't mean a
Mm,
uniformity.
mhm,
Um,
mm-hmm,
all have different things that we bring to the table that
mm,
complement each other. Like God is specifically gifted uh, that, like Steve, He's specifically gifted you in ways that complement, like in our friendship, that strengthen me. I've
mm,
said, like you bring out a side of me in our friendship
mm,
that is unique to our friendship. That's there. Tolkien and the Inklings writers, they used to all talk around this idea
mm,
and I forget who died first. I'm going to butcher this, but one of the things they were grieving was I won't see the side that he brought out in my other friend,
mm, yeah.
right? That uniqueness. And within the body of Christ, within the community of Christ, we all have a part. And so often people are like, I'm waiting for someone to kind of make the first move towards me And it's just hard to connect in this place, and no one's very friendly. And for me, like, I don't want to like be like, hey, suck it up, and that's not a big deal. I'm like, I understand that, but imagine if you just started to do the things that you wish others were doing. Like, what if
Yeah.
you started that, right? And you recognize, and not in an arrogant way, not thinking more highly of yourself than you ought, but actually, our church needs me as much as it needs you, as much as it needs
Mhm.
you. Like, we have gifts, abilities that strengthen the church,
Mhm.
that uniquely bring us together.
Mhm.
So let's celebrate that, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but let's celebrate that. So
I think it's hard too because you have to do the really hard work of also examining yourself in that, you know. I know it's crazy, but like I've been jealous of Andrew, before, and I've wished I've had your gifting, and I've wished I've had lots of different your hair, your clothing style, all of that thing, whatever. But
okay, we've
yeah,
all
especially there, Andrew used to have a beautiful head of hair, but there's so many things, you realize like I have to actually realize what causes how I contribute to this unity. And a lot of those things we don't want to examine it within our own selves. But man, when we do, I will say it's brought together a different side because you're able to see other people with compassion and you're able to appreciate their gifts. It's like I wish I had a platform. Or, I used to be in a church. I'm not in a church regularly or things like that. And there's sometimes these pieces where I'm like, gosh, like do I not get to do that? Or why God hasn't called me to that? And when I realized, no, because God's calling me to something different within his kingdom, and that person is gifted and geared towards whatever it is that they're doing, it helps you to see, wow, this is the full picture of how God brings about unity is that it comes around purpose, but ultimately submission to one another out of reverence for Christ. And that is those pieces that I think help us one build towards unity, but also causes us to reflect back and think that how am I contributing to disunity? And I think the answer is ugly, but God's really kind, when he realized, hey, you're envious, yeah, your conversation here or your thought here is toxic, that's not biblical language, but I'll just say it's in there. Is that it's not helping cultivate more unity within your community. So
Man, that's a convicting thing. And I with community, there has to be humility. There has to be
yeah.
almost a submitting to the others around you of putting them higher than
Mhm.
yourself. Because I find in a lot of the times in looking for community, there's so much expectation of put on other people or the place or the time or what it is and
Mhm.
how does it suit me? How does it suit what I want
Yep.
situation, which is such a community killer, like every single time. Because every time expectation becomes the only thing in anything, it kills whatever it's in.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And the thing is we expect more than we think. It's like we actually think it's up to somebody else to create community. Like I don't know if you've ever had the experience of showing up to church and you're like, well, no one said hi to me. And my question is like, did you take the risk to say hi to people too? Or, maybe where God wanted you to grow is to step into that situation for somebody else that maybe was feeling awkward, or maybe somebody else who felt like they were really alone. And your moment in there was recognizing that you're not the only lonely person, or you aren't the only person who needs connection. But to take that risk yourself and say, if I want something from somebody else, maybe I need to actually put myself out there and do that. And I think, Andrew, I think you talked earlier in the podcast that like I love being a rallier because I realized that sometimes I was frustrated in situations where like, why isn't anyone rallying things for me, or why isn't anyone and I was like, man, I could add to the thousands of other people who are out there doing that, or I can be like the one brave soul out there that's like, hey guys, come on in, water's nice. Like, hey guys, like come be a part of this thing and come be a part of this dinner party that we're doing. It's some stupid theme, and create those connections for so many people who need it. So
no, and I think that's the incredible thing of you stepped into that and you do that so well, right? And I've watched you do that, and I've learned from you the risk that you're willing to take on behalf of other people to pull them in, and the risk of like, what did Jesus do constantly? He pulled the disciples into the work that he was doing. Like, he's like, come and see, come in like and watch me do this. Now do it with me,
Mm.
and now you're gonna go do it, right? And
Yeah.
even if it's like, your 12th new hobby that you have, right? Like you're pulling people in, and that's one of the things I've always admired within you. But I also think one of the things that you touched on earlier of like we can be jealous even of our friends.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that I've always appreciated in our friendship, because we've traded jealousies, right? Like there's been times
Mm,
where I have been like, man, why does he get to do that? Why, like, they're absolutely.
mm,
And I think one of the things I've always appreciated and you've modeled is like, you've been willing to call that out of like, man, I'm kind of mad
mm,
at you right now because of this. And it gave me space to be like, well, I'm kind of mad at you right now because of this, because
Mm.
I'm a little jealous,
mm,
not to get in too deep, but like there was a season where we were leading together while we were both pursuing the same job. Like
mm,
imagine what that does to the soul of a friendship. We had to go through
mm,
hefty waters, but we also agreed in the midst of that at the end of whatever came to be, we would still be friends.
Mm.
Um,
mm,
that was
mm,
like a common commitment that also, by the grace of God, like we walked through that, and
mm,
instead of that being a pulling apart, it strengthened us, and because of the vulnerability, right? Uh,
mm.
and so
Wow, that got really real there all of a sudden. But I think it's so true. I think we were saying throughout that season that we had to fight for was that I care more about our friendship than I care about this job. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that was some of the things that we had to like keep reminding each other of. And dude, man, I can't think back at that whole time. It brings up so many emotions, but the thing that brings me the most amount of joy and love is I really got to see your heart. Like I got to see the worst of Andrew, literally, and then Andrew got to see the worst of me, and we still love each other through it. And I think the testimony of the fact that like I don't think this gets modeled very much, is like to think about I had to recognize my selfish ambition, and recognize how I was contributing to the pulling apart of our friendship. And there are moments where we realize you have to fight for unity, and that comes at incredible, incredible personal costs. And to lay down your life for another person, like it's like really romantic in the movies, but I don't think we realize, like sometimes I'm like, I think it's in some ways easier to die for somebody else than it is for you to like lay down what you desire for what somebody else desires. And looking in that whole season, like I knew we had talked about friendship. I knew we had talked about how good our friendship was. But looking back on that season, I think it was proving to the fact that like everything we said that we would be committed to was something we truly believed in. And I wouldn't change that for the world. And there's no shortcutting that kind of friendship. It was us walking through that together. And that was like, man, so painful and so rich. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. So yeah, man.
there's something incredibly powerful of someone seeing you implode or kind of at your worst, or like what like
Mm,
the toxic stuff that's in your heart coming out loud, right? And after you have that moment and they're still standing there and I'm
yeah,
with you, and like I love you and
yeah,
I'm for you. That is a radical shift, right? And I
yeah,
think we
yeah.
both got to trade that at different times.
Yeah, so cheesy, right? People are listening to this and they're like, "Oh
Like,
my
oh, you
gosh,
guys.
like, what is it? This bromance is so cheesy." But like, I feel like this is what true friendship looks like, I think it confounds our world, right? Because you look at the relationship with Jonathan and David, and our world has all kinds of interpretations of what that is, but it's purely because they don't know how to be friends. They don't know what it's like to have two two people like carry each other that deeply, and be willing to lay themselves down, so that another person can thrive, and that's a beautiful thing. Like if and I feel like this is something that the church has as a gift to to a lonely world, but we have to go through that process that makes it really difficult to do that. And I think we need more people modeling what that looks like in healthy, painful, beautiful ways.
And and I think when we're talking around this, and I think most of you, if whoever's listening, you know this. This isn't because Steve and I have like we got it perfect. I think what's amazing is what we've walked through and navigated in life together, and still to be loved for exactly who you are, and rooted for,
Mm,
and also there's a rooting that's like, hey, also I'm going to be willing to call out the hard things in you,
yeah.
that need to be shaped, and there's a trust that's been built over time, and that to me is the opportunity of community of disciples who are following in the way of Jesus together. And I think people see that and they go, that's impossible, or that takes time. It does. It takes time to invest in somebody else. It
Mm,
takes time,
Mhm.
but you got to start somewhere.
Mhm.
And so I think for me, the question I would have if I'm listening along, like where do I start if I want to
mhm.
be intentional about pursuing community, particularly as disciples that want to follow in the way of Jesus together with others. Where might I begin? And I'll throw that out to you guys if you've got thoughts.
Mm. Yeah, I think that realizing there's no shortcuts, and I would start the most basic ways, like just start showing up. I know it sounds really cheesy, and I know it sounds really difficult considering that like I flaked on you like two times now, Andrew, like speaking, but like is being as consistent as you can for when you say you're going to show up with people and getting out of your mind that awkward feeling of like what are they going to do if we meet for coffee or have lunch together. Um, and or maybe just showing up or the easiest way is around the commonalities, like those interests. Like think about baby steps. I love micro steps, and if I realize that I don't have to like jump across a bridge to get across an impossible gap, but there's a little step of, hey, you really like painting die cast metals, like teach me how to do that.
It's your next hobby. It's coming.
Yeah, whatever
Then you
weird
know
thing that you
it
do. Sorry, if you guys do that, I appreciate you, and maybe one day we'll connect on that. But taking away that sense of like, oh well, that's not my interest. That's not what I like to do. But to make the effort to go out there and be curious about somebody else's life, I think it starts at a very basic level. Like when you're having conversation, are you the one that's wanting the expectation? I'm going to get a chance to share my story, or are you genuinely curious about the story of the person who's literally sitting right in front of you?
No, it's huge. I like that idea too of I think being intentional with like who's already in your life, and going, okay, who's in my circle, that maybe I can pursue a little bit. Maybe they're on the fringe, or man, I was recently having a conversation with a guy who, we had talked around getting together for coffee, and we finally did it. But then we were both laughing as like our wives were making fun of us as we were texting each other, trying to set up the time and place because we were both overthinking everything we were sending because we're like, this is like a new like, can we do like and I was laughing. I'm like, man, this is so awkward, and we make it so much harder than it needs to be. But you have to start somewhere, and so
Mhm.
who are the
Exactly.
again, I think there's a risk involved there. And I think not putting pressure on, hey, if I'm going to have coffee with this person, that means they're going to be my best friend for the next
Mhm.
20 years. Uh,
Exactly.
just
Mhm.
show
Exactly.
up and allow God to work within that and
Mhm.
be yourself,
Mhm.
and begin just where you are.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
does this
I think
become
it's a courageous first step. I think that some people are like, well, Steve, you're an extrovert. That's easy for you. And I realized not that my first step is different than your first step. I think for me, I can connect with a lot of people, but I think if it was naturally up to me, I wouldn't go past the surface level, diecast metal, Niners, Warriors, whatever. But it's like for me, the challenge is my next step is like, are you actually asking deeper questions of that person, or are you genuinely curious about what's going on with their life? And for some people, like I need to actually build up the courage to like send a text and say, hey, how's it going? Or can I pray for you? Or, just something, start whatever that is, start small because there are no such thing as small steps. Eventually, those small steps become repetition that help you grow as a human being.
I would add for a place to start would be to jump in serving. And I hate saying that as someone who works at a church because it's always like, oh, I serve here, serve there. Like
So self-serving.
that's definitely not what I'm doing.
If you'd
But
like to join kids ministry,
we have
go
a
ahead,
place
and
for
there's
you.
a line email showing up right here.
Yeah, and you should.
Yeah, absolutely. But serving somewhere, because then you're going to be shoulder to shoulder with other
Mm,
people that you may not meet anytime else, and doing something in common. Like I think back to our
mm,
community food distribution when we started that. I think it's been almost 2 years now. Um, it started out that, okay, like we got food, now we need volunteers to run this. And there are
Mhm.
so many people who volunteer, and some
yeah,
people who we don't even know are volunteering, and they just show up and they're like, I'm here to help. Because there's a
Yeah.
commonality of, oh, I wanna love this community. I wanna love the people around me who need a little help, who need prayer.
yeah,
And at the same time, they get to meet other people who
right,
want to do the same thing. So I would say if you don't want to do the intimidating thing of meeting with someone one on one, because that can be scary
yep,
depending on your personality type, like serve alongside someone.
yeah.
I think that's a
Yeah.
the really easy way to start.
Well, and
Yeah. Yeah.
to using that same example of the community food distribution, what's been fun to see develop there too is people got to know each other, serving alongside each other, started to request, hey, can we continue to serve the same shifts
That's
because they
cool.
enjoyed the community that was happening there.
Mm,
But then, as often happens, when you see people who enjoy being around each other, that's a really welcoming environment. I know
mhm,
sometimes I can feel
mhm,
like, oh, it's cliquish or this or that. But when people are good at like, man, we are living out this community together, oftentimes it's very much like an open table. We're like, no, come on in and sit with us. And I think one of the things that we don't often talk a lot around is like the relational component of God himself within the
mm,
Trinity, that we're
Mm.
invited into a relationship that has always been.
mm,
And it's something that's deep inside of us in the way that
mm,
we're created in his image, right? And so we long for community and an invitational community. Like,
mm,
hey, come on in, join with us in what God's doing in our lives, and you're going to bring
Mm.
something that we can't experience without you. So
mhm.
join with us.
Oh
Um,
my gosh. I feel like we need a part two of this episode because that is like a whole other thing we
That
could
is
go
a whole, I
into.
know,
So
we just kind of skimmed the surface there on that one,
yeah,
but
yeah,
there,
yeah. I had to fight the urge to be like, let's open up a new can, but we're not going to do that. So
um, I think one of the things that's always helped me to in building community, in building like deep friendships in Jesus is be the friend you wish you had.
Mm,
And not wait again. I know I sound like a broken record, not wait for the other person to kind of make that first move, but model what you're looking for. I think that's really important. And I also think
mm,
probably when community's developing further, like when you've got to this point where like, oh, I think we're really friends. There's been times where it's been really helpful. And Steve, you and I have had these conversations, and I've had these conversations with other friends where there's kind of this defining the friendship of like, hey, I need you to know I'm counting on you for this.
yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes we'll assume what people are counting on us for, and man, we miss that a lot.
Mm,
But I've found that so helpful when someone says, actually, I'm really counting on you to speak into my life and the good things and the things that you see, because you get up close to me, and I'm counting
Mm,
on you. If I'm
mm,
drifting from Jesus, I'm counting on you to be someone who says, hey man,
yeah.
mm,
No, that's I think that is like so important is like it helps set expectations, but also it's nice to know you're being counted on, you know? And rather than me being frustrated at why you didn't show up, it's like, well, did I ever tell them that I wanted them to show up, you know? And I mean there's a whole other story we can go into that, but I'm not gonna do that here. But I would also say don't be surprised by the unexpected relationships that you build. You know, I think sometimes we think that the people who need to show up in my life need to look like this, be in my age bracket, like the same things I like, and then all of a sudden this other person shows up and they're not in our age bracket. They don't like the same things. They don't dress like, but they keep showing up. And I think that that's one of the things is like we have such a narrow view of like who could be our friends or who we can connect with that we actually ignore that there are other people that God is bringing into our life that are unexpected great friendships that are just waiting to happen. And I talk about this because Andrew, I think we've shared this, but God always brings in people who've been like deeply hurt by church, or they don't want anything to do with God. They end up coming into my life and they think they're gonna, convert the pastor to thinking that, whatever. And but as I get deeper, as I keep showing up, as I keep, um just interacting with them, loving on them, it's like all of a sudden they're like, gosh, like I didn't think that I would have a connection with a pastor. We couldn't be more different. But that really surprised me that we would become friends. And I think that we have to, as people, really think like broaden our horizon in terms of, especially when we're so lonely as a culture, to say, what if there are friendships to be discovered in unexpected places? And there are people literally in our church right now who you'd be like, I have no idea what having coffee with that person would be like. But maybe you just gotta lean in. And if it's awkward, it's awkward. Don't worry about it, And then maybe you continue to try again and try again, try again. And you might be surprised to find the depth of friendship you can build from somebody who is so incredibly different than you.
I love that. Um, I think kind of last thing before we move into kind of our last practices and things we want people to do. I have found in friendships, in whether even in like a small group setting or a home group setting, um, it sounds funny to say this within church, but you have to be really intentional about keeping Jesus at the center, because it can quickly become about everything else. And if we're saying, hey, we're disciples of Jesus, we're learners of Jesus, we want to pattern our life after him, following in his way, and we're coming together under that common union, right? That community,
Mhm.
um, that needs to be a central piece of what we're talking around. And again, that's not the checklist of did you pray today? Did you, all the things. But it's hey, what's God teaching? I have a friend of mine who asks me that all the time, and I love the question because it helps me when if I hesitate, I'm like, I don't have anything to share there. Then I'm like, oh, interesting. Why don't I have anything to share there of like what God's teaching me right now, or what I'm paying attention to, or what I'm breathing?
Mm.
And it's not this loaded question of like,
Mhm.
have you read through the Bible in a month, kind of thing. It's just like, hey, what is your active relationship with God like right now? What's Jesus
Mhm.
speaking to you about? And that's a simple question of like, hey, is there anything God's bringing to your attention right now? And
Mm.
sometimes it's like, yeah, actually, let me share with you. Like, this has been super fun. Sometimes it's like, yeah, actually, there's some things there's some things he's telling me to pay attention to that aren't great. Like it hasn't been, but it's been good because I know where he's leading me. But keeping Jesus at the center of our conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
I mean,
don't.
that's again, it goes back to that. It's like it transcends. I think in a very small way. People don't know this, but like I'll send Andrew my sermons, and for a preacher, that's a really vulnerable thing, is somebody reading your raw thoughts, But it's become such a joy, because I'm inviting him into the process. He gets to see like literally the raw recipe that goes into what that final product is. And it allows you to kind of cheer on that person too, like after it's been delivered and say, oh, I remember when you cut that, that was painful. But it was a better message because you did that. And I think we do that with our own lives. I'm inviting you into the story of my life, raw or not, processed or unprocessed. And together you help kind of mine out the goal, and that helps us discover and maybe recognize some things that God is actually doing in your life that you never even saw before, just from having a different perspective. And I think that that's the beauty of what friends do for one another. And so if your friends only reaffirm, and which is important, or they only build up what you already believe to be true, I would question whether or not you're truly friends. And so, you know, going beyond that and just saying like, hey, are they an acquaintance? Or are they somebody that's truly with you? I was like, have you truly invited them to see the raw material of your life, or is it all just like Instagram filters and like looks great, but they don't really know you? For
And
episode 3, once we dive into that
and
a little bit more.
all of this, like it does take time. And it takes, and what I found too is that friendships are often forged not in like the easiest of times, but in hard times or crisis, but often
Mm,
haven't given enough life to friendships when the crisis comes. We're like, who are the people around me?
Mm.
And so, man, I would encourage you, if you have yet to, start investing in people's lives. It's not if crisis will come, it's when it comes. That you've got some people who can strengthen you around you,
Mhm.
in the same way that crisis is going to come for your friends, and you can come around them
Mm.
and walk with them to encourage one another, to strengthen one another, to
Mhm.
stir one another up towards love and good works.
Yeah.
Those are the things that we want to continually be about. And the danger of this conversation is there is like episode 3 and 4 that we could go into.
Yeah. I'm like biting
I'd
my
say we're
lip here
not
to be
going
like, oh, don't say anything else.
like if
But
we talk around,
yeah,
yeah, when we just thought you were gonna die, those are good times for another time. We'll leave
another time. If you like this episode, let us know if you want to hear
cry.
deeper, raw thoughts. And but it'll be moving for sure. If some of you guys are like, I wonder what they would fight about. Well, that's a lot. So
Oh, and also we laugh a lot. So
yeah.
there's a million things coming to mind, and I'm
Oh
editing
my
my.
gosh. We could talk about Israel. Oh, you know what? Is there like an uncut version of this of just, here's the behind the scenes takes that no one else is gonna get a chance to
We're
see.
we're doing that annoying thing right now that people are like, they
Oh, I
feel
know. Okay, move on.
like we're
Move on.
laughing and we haven't said a word, but I know what you're
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah.
And so that's
This is
not.
going in the cut. Sorry, Ruth.
No, everything stays, man.
Everything
That's part of
stays.
Ah, sorry, audience. But now you're curious
Yeah.
and you want to know. Stay
Steve,
tuned.
Steve will be back. That's it.
Yeah.
That's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So we always like to end with practices.
Mhm.
Where do I start with this? We've said a lot of these things. I think even the encouragement that we've given. But I would say start where you are. Prayerfully make, just, hey Lord, is there someone that you want me to pursue? Is there someone that I keep running into that is there a next step? Ruth, I love your idea of serving alongside people, because it doesn't feel as risky, but it's a great way to get to know some people.
Yeah, and build connections.
Shoulder, when
Mhm.
you're face to face, that can be a little intimidating.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, shoulder to shoulder is the way to go.
Mhm.
shoulder to shoulder is awesome. But start where you are, and just see what God can do through that. Begin to
Mhm.
invest.
Mhm.
I do think if there's someone that you are like, man, I've been in this person's proximity and enjoying their company, and I think there could be friendship here.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
Grab coffee,
Mhm.
grab lunch, and don't make it weird,
Mhm.
as much as you can. But just like, hey, it would be great to hang out,
Mhm.
and grab coffee or lunch. I think the intentionality piece of that too,
Mhm.
what I have found bonds people is when you get to share each other's story.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so ask a lot of questions about who they are, and but also be willing to share your story,
Mhm.
what
Mm.
God's done in your story. And again,
Mhm.
like we are talking around people who are disciples following in the way of Jesus together. Um, don't kind of like bury the lead there.
Mhm.
Be willing to be like, yeah, I've been following Jesus. This is how he got a hold of me. This
Mhm.
is part of my story.
Oh,
There's
that's so
different
good.
layers you can go with that, right? Like there's obviously certain parts of the story that sometimes it's like, as we become better friends, you'll get to know the
Mhm.
darker parts, right? Um,
Yeah. I was literally just doing the math on my phone here, and I was like, "Oh, we've been friends for 17 years, so hey, we're almost adults. Our friendship is almost adults." But
our
you
friend,
realize that in the 17 years, there's so much life that happens in those 17 years. Like you knew me pre-kids, then us having going through that process of having a baby, and getting sick, and so many of those different things. And I just don't think there's a way you could shortcut it, and realizing that some friendships are for a season, and embrace that. Sometimes it's just they're in this for this season, and that's okay. They're not good or bad. It's just the way that it is. Very natural. There are some friendships that at some point you kind of off ramp, and that's also a very natural, healthy thing. And then there are going to be some friendships that are in it for the long haul, and not having that expectation that every friendship you have is going to be an 18-year old friendship that ages like a fine wine, and it's awesome, but instead recognize that, like, just take it as every day is a gift, and the time that you're in friendship, that is a gift. And sometimes when you miss that person, just take that as a nudge to reach out and just say, "Hey, I'm thinking about you." It might not ever have the same depth that it did before, but the reality is, like, they're still written into your story and into who you are. But I think judging softly your friendships um, gives you a ton of freedom, and realizing, like, we're not out there. Hopefully, this podcast, I'm like, make a friend, and not like every friendship needs to go through the gut, like Steve and Andrew did, in order to become friends. And saying, like, it's okay, take it as it is. And if there's one friend that you have that depth with, that's a gift. And to continue leaning in and discovering what that looks like for you.
Awesome, man.
Mm.
Well,
Is this my next sermon? Is this what it's on, or what?
apparently we'll do a sit down and we'll
I get too nerdy when I talk about friendships, community, all that thing.
well, and there's always more, right? Like, and we know
Yeah.
that. The important thing is begin to take that first step.
Yeah.
And sometimes people, in different stages of life feel like, well, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, or like there's different age points where
Oh,
you get,
yes.
and so you're like, but I don't know if I want to have deep.
Invest. Yeah, that's exactly it.
I can tell you, if you're leaving somewhere, I want to be careful how I say this. If you're leaving somewhere and there's no grief to the friendships you've lost, you've missed an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, dude. And don't ghost people, dude. If you gotta go, that's part of life. Say goodbye, for crying out loud, Like, yeah, and talk about, like, with people at church that left. Yeah, sorry, you're laughing at me, but it's true. Like, if you're gonna leave my church, like, just tell me goodbye. It's totally fine. And you're going to a new place. Our desire is for you to grow, and for you to, like, at some point realize that sometimes churches exist for a season. Like, I'm back at my former church, and it's just one of those things where you realize that, there's so many people who come and go, and it's like you've invested in their life. You've baptized their families, you've buried their parents, you've done all of these things. Just take a moment to be like, hey, like, thank you for what you did, and I just am in a new season, and God's moving me a new place, and I'm going to say, great, God bless you. I'm so glad that we had that. But also the same with friendships. Like, saying goodbye to you was painful, Andrew, but I knew, because of all the things we've gone through, that it, again, just transcends distance and time. And we pick up the phone. At minimum, we have a real relationship. And by real, I mean REEL. Like, we send each other Instagram reels all the time. And that just helped. Like, for me, I'm like, oh, he's thinking about me, and the weird ways that I laugh at people getting hurt.
It's a true story. Oh man. Well, as we close, hopefully this has been helpful. I'm grateful for those of you who have been following along with us.
Listening for an hour and a half. I'm sorry.
as you as you think through these things, my hope is that you go deeper in community, because we really are built to live in relationship with others. And there's so much there for us. And I know it can be scary, it can be overwhelming. We've been burned, we've been hurt. I know there's a lot of stories there, particularly within church. And so and sometimes in our laughter of those things, it's kind of like how we've had to process through those too. But we're not making light of that. And so I just would encourage you to step out, to find a few other people to walk through life with, as you pursue Jesus together, following in his ways. Being connected in community is so vital, so vital. So no, we're praying for you. We're looking forward to coming back. We'll be back in our next episode. We'll talk around worship, and what does that look like to worship everywhere and everything. Steve, my friend, thank you so much for joining with us. It is always too much fun in many ways when you are around. You're loved here, and I feel like when we moved up here, we just like extended your family, because you really are family up here. So
Yeah.
look forward to seeing
Yeah,
you.
I can't wait to be back with you guys. So
Looking forward to it. Ruth, thanks for jumping in again and co-hosting alongside me. Always fun, and we will see you next month.
all right, later, guys.